Well, good evening. I'm Sue Hutchins, and I'm here again with yet another episode or another interview of Iowa Prison Perspectives. Some of you who have been here before have heard this little blurb, but there may be some people who haven't been here before. So let me tell a little bit about what this is and why I'm doing it. This channel is actually for you, the public, to become more informed about prison, about what happens in prison and what it's like for people who are affected by the criminal justice system. I interview people who have been incarcerated, loved ones or friends of people who have been or are currently incarcerated, advocates like myself who are interested in reform of some sort in a positive direction, and people who have worked for the Department of Corrections here in the state of Iowa. The organizations that are part of this collaboration are Living Beyond the Bars of Iowa, Iowa Cure, and the Iowa Justice Action Network. Those three organizations have great interest in what goes on with not only the people who are incarcerated, but also the families and other people who are affected by incarceration. I really want to hear from you. I really want your feedback on what I'm doing, what you think about these interviews, whether you agree or disagree. If you know somebody who you think should be interviewed, or if you yourself feel like you should be interviewed, please contact me. I can be reached at Iowa Prison Perspectives. That's IA Prison Perspectives at gmail.com. And if you like these, please let me know. You can hit the like button. And if you want to subscribe, please feel free to do that. That helps me and the organizations that I represent. So if you care to, I would appreciate that. This evening we have a recently new friend of mine who I have just known. I met him several years ago at a conference that we did in Coralville, Iowa. And then we met again about 2 weeks ago. And I don't think we recognized each other until our conversation was just about over. but we did put that together. So let me introduce you to him. I call him Meach because I have a very difficult time pronouncing his whole name. He is an advocate for people who are incarcerated and for their families. He's been involved since his college years, and he is currently involved in seeing on a spiritual level, working with people in the Anamosa State Reformatory. So with that, I will turn it over to Meach, and he will be telling you about his history with incarcerated people, how he got interested, what he does, and what he's doing now. I also want to mention that he has put together a hip hop group of young people, a positive hip hop group, which I had the pleasure of seeing at one time. So anyway, I will turn it over to Meach, and he will tell you his story. Thank you for being here, Meach, and it's all yours.
So thank you for the invitation. I'm, very excited to share about my experiences advocating for prisoners and just the quality of the relationships I've, earned. It's been really transformatory. But even, as you were describing, in the introduction, it reminded me that, so I'm a former college professor, and my area was literacy instruction and education. But my research is, basically got started because I was looking at literacy in the African American slave community. And the reason that started was because of a quote by the author Henry Louis Gates. He said, the slaves who learned to read and write were the first to run away. And I had never heard anything where in the African American community, a runaway slave is like an iconic, heroic figure. And I never associated reading and writing, as something so central to that iconic identity. And so that just fascinated me, and I started doing research on it. And then as my research evolved, I started to see that there's a continuum, and this has been played out in Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow, where slavery really didn't go anywhere. It just happened to reformulate itself. And so there's a continuum between slavery and, the prison system.
Yes.
And so many of the heroic African American figures in African American literature were once incarcerated people who developed a passion for reading and writing, and that was part of their liberation story. And the author Ralph Ellison, calls it kind of a so African Americans first became prominent in reading and writing through what are called slave narratives. And those were autobiographical accounts of their journey from being slaves to becoming free men and women. And so, as saying earlier, slavery
Mhm.
really didn't just disappear, it just took on a different form. And so, just in the same way that African American slaves found liberation through literacy in various ways, uh, African American prisoners. Malcolm X probably is the prototypical example of that, because there would be no Malcolm X had he not developed a passion for reading and writing. You know,
Mhm.
the famous story of him, basically, he was uneducated, inarticulate, and he was watching educated uh, inmates debate one another. And he was envious of their knowledge, of their articulate nature of their arguments, and wanted to become like them. But he was illiterate and couldn't read or write and just was frustrated. But he decided I was going to do something, take some kind of action to, create this, identity for myself. And so
Mhm.
he started copying the dictionary. And he talked
Ah,
about going from aardvark to, like, I can't remember the Z word that was at the end of the dictionary, but he spent every day for probably several years just copying the dictionary into notebooks. And he said that the vocabulary that he learned, the information that he gained access to, it literally transformed his mind and his identity.
yes.
So the rest is history. So in addition to, my experiences, as a practitioner of Islam at that time, where I had many friends who were incarcerated, I had that research, was like, seminal, you know,
Yes.
to my engagement in these issues.
Which is wonderful. That, and thank you for sharing that. I mean, it's wonderful that you have shared that information, because a lot of people, I'm sure, don't know that. I,
Oh
I
yeah.
didn't I didn't know that until I really got involved in
Mhm.
learning and studying some about mass incarceration and how
Oh
we
yeah.
got into this mess,
Oh
and,
yeah. Yeah.
and the connection. Well, and that the new Jim Crow really opened,
Mhm.
I think, a lot of people's eyes to this
Yeah.
is just an extension.
Yeah.
Prison is just an
Exactly.
extension of slavery,
Hmm.
and the in my mind the tragedy of that. So I'm really glad that you talked about that, because I
Hmm.
think people need to hear that, and I think it is good to hear that from an African American professor, and I think
Hmm.
it's also good to hear that from a European woman, that
Yeah. Yeah.
that's
Mhm.
where that's where this all came from, is
Yeah.
slavery,
Yeah.
and it's just an extension of that.
Hmm.
What it reminds me of to some degree is the knowledge that I learned about the jail to prison pipeline,
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
where children are marked at a pretty young age as chance as counted in the future prison population in Iowa. We
Hmm.
used to, a few years ago, what was true was that children, they started deciding how many inmates, projecting how many inmates would be in prison based on the different behavior problems that kids had starting in the third grade, which is to
Hmm.
me just tragic that they would look at the children in third grade,
Oh
see who
yeah.
all had behavior problems, and figure that those kids were statistically likely to go to
Mhm.
prison.
Yeah. Yeah.
We also know the statistics about African Americans being 10 times or 7 times more likely than Caucasians to go to prison, um,
And the
here.
other thing you thought, the school to prison pipeline, implicit in that is the role of the schools.
Right.
You're saying, they get identified and, and targeted
Mm-hmm.
because of, behavior problems. And
Mm-hmm.
then, with my research, and even subsequent research by scholars, as a matter of fact, there's a very powerful study by a woman named Goldie Mohammed, who wrote a book called Cultivating Genius. And again, kind of building off of that quotation where the slaves
Mm-hmm.
learned to read and write were the first to run away, that led to a radical embrace of literacy on the part of African American slaves. And one of my favorite stories is Frederick Douglass, who talks
Yes.
about, in his slave narrative, uh, not only were you supposed to, um, not only, did people believe that, okay, reading and writing could uh, create this liberation experience, it wasn't just something that they did for themselves individually. So once Frederick Douglass learned how to read and write, he created these underground railroad type literacy academies where he said up to 40 people learning how to read and write at one time because they believed that that was going to lead to your liberation. And so just they really say the whole foundation of African American literature is based on that sort of continuum. And
Yes.
so, it's very powerful when you start to see that the schools, when they don't. And so what Goldie Muhammad found was that after emancipation, African Americans created their own kind of literacy academies, and she studied the quality of those because again, one of the biggest issues they talk about in education, the achievement gap, you know,
Exactly.
and that's really focused on reading. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that she found is that the schools, by emphasizing the skill and not really connecting the skills to the identity transformations that had historically motivated African Americans to read and write, is really creating part of the problem. And like you said, once you have struggle in the classroom with your literacy, then you're more
Mm-hmm.
likely to be disruptive in the classroom. You're disruptive in the classroom. You get sent to the principal's office. You get labeled. Again, just like you said, based on those labels and based on those disruptions and disciplinary instances, they start using that data to then, start to accommodate, future prison, and future incarceration. And so the schools, complicity in that is something that's been interesting to me as well.
Me too. Sad to say. I
Yeah.
was not, I mean, I was really naive. I had no idea about
Mhm.
any of that
Oh
prior
yeah.
to prior 10 years ago or 15
Mhm.
years ago when I got really interested in mass incarceration and started to really look at it. And I'm hoping that people who listen to this who aren't informed and aware of that dynamic will do some research and check and see if what we're saying is true,
Oh yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
because it's really important. The more people that understand that, the better chance we have of getting better, of
Yeah.
doing better, of being better as individuals.
The proactive approach instead of reacting to incarceration.
Exactly.
If you help students, and to me that emphasis on identity is so powerful because if you identify yourself as an educated person and you have goals for yourself in the future that are in keeping with being successful as an educated person, there's really no space for incarceration in there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if it's your identity and somebody comes to you with something that's going to lead you down a path of criminality that would, help you wind up in prison, that you're going to reject it. And that identity factor is so critical. So, for example, even women in the sciences, where
Mm-hmm.
they weren't very well represented in the professional, science field, but the women, let's say there were some very powerful examples of women who uh, their fathers, made a point of socializing them to believe that they could be great scientists.
Mm-hmm.
Those those women, they go into an environment where the other males are hostile to them. They are resilient because it's their identity. If
Mm-hmm.
they hear you can't make it, or you're not smart enough, they can reject that because they've had their parent tell them,
Mm-hmm.
you're made for this. You're smart. And they participated in it. So it's who they are. It's not
Mm-hmm.
just something that they've aspired to. They've had that experience. In the same way, if someone's, reading and writing and has dreams of their future, where they're using their education to get a career and be successful, that person's going to be much more resilient against the kinds of influences that would lead them to become incarcerated because their identity is fundamentally different.
For sure. For
And
sure.
so there's
For
a much
sure.
bigger role that education can play in addressing this proactively than we really talk about it, as you were mentioning.
Yes. And like I say, I'm glad that you brought that up. And I
Hmm.
do hope that people will do some research into that and find out for themselves
Hmm.
the truth about that. I would like you, if you don't mind, I would like you to talk about the hip hop group.
Oh, okay,
We
all right.
started. Yeah, because that was great.
Yeah, well, that's kind of an extension of the same kind of thing. There are kids who are alienated from the way schools teach reading and writing.
Hmm.
They teach, in many cases, they teach books that don't relate to their lives. The
Hmm.
authors don't, have backgrounds related to their lives. So they're really, it's like, so what? What do I need to learn this for? But yet
Hmm.
they're fans of hip hop. So they know
Hmm.
lyrics, they can memorize lyrics. And then if you even just are familiar with the structure of hip hop music, uh, the chorus is very short.
Hmm.
You'll think about one of the most famous early hip hop songs, "Don't Push Me 'Cause I'm Close to the Edge. I'm trying not to lose my head." That's the chorus. And the rest is all, lyrical content. So you have to use more words. As a matter of fact, the Broadway musical Hamilton
Right.
had more words in that musical than any other Broadway musical in history by a factor of thousands. It wasn't even close.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so if you're a fan of hip hop is something that's a part of your life, and you memorize the lyrics, and a lot of kids, in their own spare time, they're writing lyrics, and they
Hmm.
aspire to be artists. And when they're involved with those kind of things, they're actually preparing themselves to be very proficient when it comes to reading and writing. And sadly, the schools don't recognize that, so they're kind of alienated from that. But through the hip hop literacy program, we say, okay, you aspire to be an artist. Let's give you some topics to write about. Let's give you a background track to, write your lyrics to, and put you in the studio and record.
Hmm.
And so you give them literacy in a format that reflects their interests, their passions, and their identity. They're going to read and write. And so that was the kind of the genesis of that. And it actually started when I was in the state of Delaware, and I had a doctoral student who was a hip hop artist, but he was also a certified teacher, and he knew the power of hip hop to improve students' education. And so that was his dissertation project. And I was basically the advisor. He did all the work. He
Yeah.
made connections to people in the music industry in Philadelphia, and got the kids performing in different parts of the country. And every single student who was in that program went to college at one point or another. And
That's
these are,
awesome.
except for one or two students, they were all first generation.
Hmm.
But when you think about it, after performing around the country, we even took a group of students to England at one point. So they've literally performed around the world. Uh, they had 3 CD projects that they did during the time they were in high school. They had, public performances that they put together and curated. And so you put all that into a college application along with good grades, and you're a very attractive candidate to go to college. And they, it was like we got to be seniors, and we're saying, okay, you need to go to college. And the first are like resisting. I never thought about going to college. Well, given all that you've done in our program, you're very eligible to go to college. And they all got in. And so that's what, I was kind of motivated to bring to Iowa when I came to Iowa. Even though I wasn't the person who did it, I'd learned enough of what was involved, and I knew to make relationships with people who are in the hip hop world here to put together the program, to make it work here.
Yeah, and it was a very, very positive group and very, very
Oh yeah,
positive
yeah.
kids
Mm-hmm.
and very, very easy to talk to. I mean, they were comfortable in their own skin, shall we
Oh
say.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, they were, because we
Oh yeah.
talked to them
Well,
afterwards and they were more than happy to chat, I mean, it
I don't
so
know if my back.
it taught them
I
quite
don't
a
know.
bit.
I don't know if when you saw them, our son was in the program because when the program started, he was like 2 years old or something like that, and so he had to wait a couple of years. And technically, the program was with third grade to eighth grade. But then when he turned 5 years old, he was like determined, you're not going to keep me out of the program anymore. Talking about, he was just presenting to the school board tonight, and I was just reflecting on the fact that, presenting, he's been presenting in front of audiences since he was 5 years old. And one time he even approached me and said, I don't understand stage fright.
Right, because he
Yeah,
grew up
yeah,
without it.
grow
Yeah,
up with it.
it's
Yeah.
part of
So
his life,
the
just
part of,
part of
again,
his
his
life.
identity. So you can't tell him otherwise.
Mhm.
So it's no, accident that when the principal he wants to have a group of his students present to the school board, yeah, he's part of that group because he has that background experience. So there's just a lot of, a lot of really rich educational foundation that you give the kids when they're part
Mhm.
of a program like that, because the writing, the reading, the thinking, we give them different topics to write about, and it just becomes second nature. Every summer, okay, I know I'm going to go to the program and get topics, and so you can tell him now, it's a set topic, and he'll find some music and he'll make a song out of it in a matter of minutes.
Yes.
That is
Yeah.
something that he grew up with. And again, this is, getting back
Mhm.
to our issue of incarceration, when students have these identities
Right.
and they're getting all this positive, reinforcement from the public about who they are and what they've done, you know, doing the kind of things that, cause you to be incarcerated just doesn't even make any sense to them.
Mhm.
And so we've had, I think when students have left the program, that's kind of the sad thing. When they've aged out of it, there really isn't something at the high school level, because we focus on late elementary and middle school. There's nearly nothing at the high school level to kind of keep them going. And so we've had some issues, but while they're in the program, we never had any issues of kids, getting in, major trouble or anything, or being disciplinary problems in school.
Mhm. It's too bad you can't get it into the high schools. You need to
Yeah,
work on
yeah, yeah, yeah. You
that.
know, I,
Make that happen.
yeah, I know. Yeah.
Easier said than done, I know.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
What comes to mind as you're talking about that is the movie Sing Sing
Mm-hmm.
and the whole dynamic of what those guys have done in prison
Oh yeah.
in with music and acting
Mm-hmm.
and art and
Oh
and
yeah.
and there are programs like that in a variety of different prisons in the country. But
Mm-hmm.
that particular movie made it to the Academy Awards. I mean,
Wow.
for
Wow.
heaven's sakes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And for those of you who are listening tonight who haven't seen that, it's well worth watching. It's available, I believe, on Prime and Max on
Mm-hmm. Wow.
and it actually is people who have been incarcerated and they're writing about their experience in doing music and
Mm-hmm.
acting while they were incarcerated in Sing
Oh,
Sing.
yeah. Yeah. Well, that's
And
the
the
thing. When,
beauty of that, I mean, the beauty of that is
yeah.
incredible.
Well, that's the thing when you have experiences going into the prisons and actually interacting with people. Uh,
Right.
they're just so many are just brilliant. And
But
yeah,
talented people,
yeah, yeah.
smart
And
people, talented people who just
and
who got overlooked in a
yeah.
variety of ways by the school system, by culture,
Oh
by
yeah.
a
Just
lot of by medical, I mean just a
mhm.
lot of a lot of ways, poverty in
Yeah.
general,
And
which is kind of
you
what we're
interact
here.
with them, and this. And so one of the things, so as I said earlier, I did the 12-week curriculum, with a group of prisoners in Anamosa, and I told them, I got to the point where I just told them, this is like, for me, it's like teaching a doctoral class.
Mm-hmm.
As with doctoral students, they have background, they have life experiences, and they have the interest. And so you throw an issue out to them, and they can take one issue. The doctoral class, tends to last like 3 hours, 2.5, 3 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And you may have two different questions that, as a professor, as a teacher, you engage the students with maybe two questions, and they have the capacity to use the whole 3 hours up with two questions.
Mm-hmm.
Because they've read about it, they've thought about it, they have life experiences that they can connect with it, and that's kind of a norm. And with when I was at Anamosa, it wasn't just two questions. We have a series of questions that the curriculum called for. But for me, it was easy, like teaching a doc class, because okay, here are the questions. I throw the questions out to them, and they get in small groups and work it out and give their different perspectives and life experiences, and it's just fascinating the kind of
Mm-hmm.
they would come up with. And we have a mutual friend who he's a scholar. I'll just put it that way. He's well
I
read,
agree.
cite different research, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
talking to an academic colleague, and
Yes.
so and in many cases they're more well read than an
They
academic.
have more time for one thing,
They have
and
time.
they're and yeah,
That's right.
and once they're, I mean, if they'd have had the, I think if they'd have had the opportunities out here
Mm-hmm.
that they have in there,
Yeah, and by
and if they'd
opportunity,
have had
it
food
doesn't
and
mean like
housing and
young people.
clothing and not been living in poverty and around drugs and
Yeah,
trying
that's
to
right.
get money and what have you, a lot of the guys and women that I know
Mhm.
personally from the work I do are really really bright people like you're talking about,
Oh yeah,
scholarly. I mean,
absolutely,
they're
absolutely.
brilliant. I mean, they're brilliant. So yes, I agree. So would you talk a little bit now about, I mean, that's a good segue into
Mhm.
you talking about um, the prison ministry that you're involved in, and more about Anamosa and your experience with Anamosa.
Yeah, well, my experience in Anamosa has just been phenomenal because one of the things that uh, motivates me as an educator is to see, you know, life transformation.
Yes.
Because again, when someone, embraces literacy, who or really gets it, it's not just an assignment that they have to perform for a grade, but there's something that they're learning about themselves, through
Hmm.
their study, through their reading, through their conversations. And as that takes place, you can just see and experience, the transformation that people are going through. And so for me, that's one of the things that in my study and my research helped me to appreciate that the prisons are a place where you can experience profound levels of transformation on the part of people. So that was my motivation for getting involved in the prison ministry. And since then, it's just kind of taken over. I had
Hmm.
been doing things because I was an educator, I had been doing things with youth, and I still have a passion for doing things with young people. But, it's just like, I had, once I had the opportunity and to go to Anamosa and on a consistent basis and start to develop those relationships, then that part of me just kind of started, fanned into flame and then said, oh, that's the thing I enjoy, more than anything else
Hmm.
because you see, you get relationship with people, and as a Christian, someone who believes that the power of Jesus is probably the ultimate transforming experience, and you share that with people, and you just see, in spite of all, just seeing things, um, not only them individually, but they're incarcerated and their families outside. Their relationships with their families are changing.
Yes.
There are, people who are alienated. This, the most extreme example. There's a friend of mine, and when I first met him, he was talking about his ex-wife, and he was talking because they have kids together, and they're talking about the kids, and he was talking about his sister. And his sister was the one who was like the leader of the family and that sort of thing. But as he started to mature and develop and get disciplined, and his perspective on life was informed by the information and the insights and the spiritual development, he told me that his sister, basically told him, "You need to be leading the family."
Oh.
He is incarcerated, and his sister, who's been leading the family for
Mhm.
years, acknowledged his growth and development to the point where she told him, "You need to be leading the family." And then, like I said, he was, when I first met him, he was talking about his ex-wife, and he said at one point, "I got to stop calling her my ex-wife because we're getting back together."
Oh.
So just to experience that level of transformation, not only, for the people directly involved with our ministry, but then you see the impact that it's having on their families outside of the ministry is just really incredible. And so it gives me a great deal of fulfillment, just to be a part. Again, that's my motivation. I love seeing lives transform. And,
Yes.
and sadly, that transformation is necessary because, people in the larger society, and sadly, to me, Iowa is probably one of the biggest transgressors in this regard. They just kind of give up, and as soon as someone's incarcerated, just like they're gone, they're
Mm.
dead. They're not even worth talking about anymore.
Mhm.
Interesting because I had an experience when I was doing my doctoral dissertation in at the University of Illinois. I was doing a classroom of a teacher who was from Iowa, and she was very powerfully effective with a broad range of kids. There were like 11 different cultures and languages in her classroom, and she just created this community where the kids could share their cultural backgrounds and share their life experiences and use literacy to talk about all kinds of different things. But I'll
Mhm.
never forget when we talked about incarceration. It was just like, her face just turned gray, and it was like, okay, we don't even need to talk about that. And that was kind of stunning given how, engaging and welcoming she is with all the kids in her classroom, some of whom, their parents have, backgrounds with incarceration.
Right.
But so she had all compassion for the kids, but then when it came to the issue of incarceration, and then when I moved to Iowa and came, to live here, I said, oh, that's why she had the attitude she does, because people here are just like you get incarcerated, you just disappear. You're no longer relevant, and that's very sad because some of the greatest transformations I've seen, as I've been explaining, are people that I've interacted with and developed relationships with through the ministry that we've had through Hope City Church.
Yes. And
Mainly because our pastor was incarcerated at one time.
yes.
That's why he has a particular passion for these issues and has made that a prominent point of emphasis for
Mhm.
our congregation.
And that's Pastor Q
Yeah,
at
Pastor
Hope City
Scott Marshall. That's right.
in Waterloo, Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
And there you can watch that on Facebook or YouTube if a person wants to
Oh yeah.
meet Pastor Q, so to speak, on
Yeah, yeah.
YouTube or Facebook.
Yeah,
You
or
can,
go to our website, myhopecity.net,
yes,
and you can
yes,
see all of our sermons and all of the
yes,
things that we're doing. Yes.
yes, yes. And it's a wonderful experience for people
Hmm.
of every ilk. I mean,
Oh yeah,
people
yeah.
from all walks of life that go to
Hmm.
that church. So it's wonderful. So, and how long have you been involved at Anamosa?
Well, it just started not even a year ago. I think it
Mhm.
was toward the end of last summer when things finally got rolling. They had to, kind of create
Right,
you had to have a welcoming, warden, and Tracy Dees
right.
was very accommodating for us, and she conducted a training toward the end of last summer so that we could, get through the paperwork necessary. So the group of us had, went through that training, and so it just took a while for the pieces to come together. And then once they did, we just had our consistent group, and basically the vision. I think the most important thing was a vision. It wasn't just
Yes.
to go and hang out or whatever, but we really have an Anamosa campus. So we have a
Mm-hmm.
Waterloo campus. We just opened a Cedar Falls campus a little bit longer than a year ago. Uh, and then Anamosa, the vision was always for Anamosa to have their own campus. And so everything that can go on at the Hope City Church, outside of the penitentiary is taking place there. And the inmates are the leaders.
Yes.
We have the different programs, and they are some powerful leaders. Oh my goodness. I just can't wait till they get to the point where they can get outside and really, have the opportunity to impact the world. And so I'm excited for that. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
to see that happen because I thought, that when I started, oh, we're going to go help these guys to
Yeah.
know the
I
Lord or
know the
whatever.
feeling, and you learn
Yeah,
more
yeah,
than you
yeah. That's
ever.
right.
Yeah,
Much more, much
that's
more.
right. That's
And,
right.
yeah, and
That's
so
right.
I'm just telling somebody, I don't know one person who's working in our ministry who wouldn't verify that they get more out of it for them than they're giving to the people involved. Now, the
Mm-hmm.
inmates are very grateful and they might dispute that. But from my perspective, it's not even a comparison. I just get so much out of being with them and even the graduation that we had for the freedom curriculum. I can't really teach, though sharing my passion as a literacy professor, are passing on that tradition of literacy that focuses on identity
Mm-hmm.
and through the transformations that come from that. Well, I can't do that in the Iowa academic system. That's not something because they want me to prepare them to go into schools and function according to the way the schools
Right.
are prioritized. So I as a professor, I teach that. I have to accommodate that. And I teach that. I slip in
Mm-hmm.
what I can, about what I'm really passionate about when it's possible. But for the most part, I'm preparing, future teachers to go teach, in a way that the schools condone. Well, at
Yes.
the end of the school year, I haven't really been able to impact, the students in a way that represents, okay, they had me as a professor, and therefore I can see the impact of that. I don't really get that.
Mm-hmm.
The graduations would come, and it wasn't that big of a deal to me. But when we had the graduation for the freedom curriculum, and I was so moved, I had something to say personally about every single student in the curriculum.
Isn't
And
that
they were
nice? Yeah.
hanging on every word just to see, just to get validated,
Mm-hmm.
and acknowledged for their brilliance. And it was just, and so I just say, okay, God gave me a real graduation to celebrate because regular one that just didn't do it for me. But so he gave me, this graduation with the men at Anamosa that really captured for
Yes.
me, what being a teacher was all about.
Yes. Yes. Well, and would you say that there is a certain level of gratitude that inmates have that
Oh
is,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. They really, a tremendous amount of gratitude. That's why I say they probably would dispute me telling
Mm-hmm.
them that, I get more out of it than they do. But I'll stick to that because that's my experience.
That's your
You know,
experience.
but they're very great, and that's the thing. You take the time to I mean, just showing up for them.
It
Somebody
means the
outside
world.
who doesn't
Yeah.
have to be there is taking their time to be with
Mm-hmm.
them. They just, if I didn't do anything else, just show up. They'd be thankful for that.
Right. Because a lot of times inmates feel so thrown away
That's right.
by our
That's right.
judicial
That's right.
system
That's
and
right. So,
and hopeless. And
hmm
prison can be a pretty hopeless
oh yeah,
place
yeah.
if you don't really get out of yourself and do something
Mhm.
as an inmate. So,
Oh yeah.
and I've heard the same thing that you're saying about getting so much more out of this
Mm-hmm.
and loving it, and that it really touches you, and I mean you just kind of live for it. I've heard that same thing from the people from the University of Iowa who taught
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah.
in the lab program,
Mm-hmm.
when they had that at Coralville at IMCC, the professors would volunteer to go in, and they said that they would, well, oftentimes I have heard them say that they would rather teach those
That's
classes than
that's
they
right.
would their
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
classes
There's no
because
comparison.
yeah, there's no
No
comparison because the
comparison.
guys were so grateful and eager to learn
Mm-hmm.
and happy to be that they were
Oh,
there and
yeah. Yeah.
talkative and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas oftentimes in their classrooms, kids just showed up,
Oh,
or
yeah.
didn't show up or whatever. But to have an enthusiastic room full of eager people to learn
That's right. That's right.
is a blessing. Is a
Yeah,
blessing.
absolutely. Absolutely. There's no comparison.
Yes, yes. So I assume that you plan to continue
Oh, absolutely.
in
Absolutely.
what you're doing. Um,
And really, that's, how we came together because as the relationships evolve, you get to
right.
know people better. And then, our friend, said, okay, you got to talk to Sue Hutchins because, again, you're one of those people who listen and take
Hmm.
their ideas seriously. And, to me, powerful. And it's kind of ironic because he sees himself as having the potential to impact the world.
Hmm. Yes, he
And
does.
and so, and that's why he takes the time to learn in the way that he does and consume
Hmm.
knowledge and information because, he actively is on a mission to take that and to actually have an impact on the world, where that's not the attitude of most people that work at the universities. Even
Right.
though you have the advanced degrees and resources and things of that nature, no one's talking about doing that. They just want to
Hmm.
teach, their classes and do what they've always done.
Hmm.
And so it's refreshing to me and inspiring to be around people who really, I mean, in all, just they really shouldn't feel they could, have that kind of impact, but they do.
Hmm.
And so it's just very inspiring, to interact and they see, us as really having contributing, to what they're trying to accomplish.
Right.
And
Which is
so,
how I feel too. I mean,
yeah,
I feel,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah, as a conduit, so to speak,
Absolutely.
to try to help make what they
Hmm.
believe happen.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
yeah, I do. I do. And I think that the people that we need to listen to most about prison are people who've been in prison.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think
Absolutely.
that when we're talking about any kind of reform, we need to listen to people who've been there, who can
Yeah.
tell us what
Yeah.
it's really like instead of us trying to tell them
Yeah. Yeah.
what their
Yeah.
experience has been like. I mean,
Hmm.
that is so annoying. When
Oh,
somebody tries to tell me how I feel because of what
yeah.
they think I've been through, I mean, it
Yeah.
just,
Yeah. Yeah.
my eyes just sort of glass over. I mean, really,
Oh, yeah.
who are we to tell them what prison
Yeah.
is like?
Well, that's kind of the, perspective of a lot of higher education because I've read some books
I know.
and I put together a literature review of those books. I'm
Hmm.
the authority. And I have another, I've encountered another of our mutual friends who happened to get out and became, is training to be an academic.
Right.
Now, he's seen as like a threat
Oh, I know.
because
Because yeah,
he's
because
actually been
he
there,
has the real perspective.
Yeah.
I
And
mean,
so
yeah, he's
when
been
he
there.
doesn't agree with the professors, then, it's like, okay, they have an issue with him. He's
Hmm.
talking about his life experience and they're trying to say, oh, no, that's not
No, no,
it
no, that's
because
not what happened.
that's not in the
That's not
book.
what happened.
That's not what happened. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, it is astounding. It is astounding.
Mhm.
When I worked in
Mhm.
the federal system, I worked with guys who were coming out of prison, and I had them for 6 months while they
Mhm.
were at the halfway house. And
Uh-huh.
my job was to help them get back into their family, emotionally reconnect,
Mhm.
fit back into society, decide who they wanted to be. So I had an hour individual, and then I had group, and then I was allowed to
Mhm.
work with the families. And the
Mhm.
program was designed and run by academics.
Okay. Uh-huh.
And and I can remember saying to one of the people who was like a supervisor of the whole region. I mean, I just said, these people don't want to be you.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
don't want to, and they don't want to be me. They
Mm-hmm.
just want to figure out how to live
Yeah,
their
yeah,
lives out
that's right.
here so
Yeah.
that they don't go back to prison. But they're not interested in changing their whole
Mm.
way of thinking to think like a psychologist thinks
Yeah,
or like
yeah,
you think they should
yeah.
think. I mean, come
Mhm.
on.
So the
Come
most
on.
viewed TED Talk of all time is a TED Talk by a man named Sir Kenneth Robinson, and that's one of the things he says about education, especially at the college level, that is trying to socialize the students to become college professors. You know, and so like you said, they don't want to be college
They don't
professors.
want to be college
Yeah, yeah.
professors. Yeah, they just want to,
It's,
yeah, they want to decide who they want to be.
yeah, exactly,
And
exactly.
we're supposed to be here to help
Mm-hmm.
guide them in that journey of figuring
Yeah,
out who they want to be based on the gifts that they have
that's right. That's right.
instead of
Best
trying
teaching
to.
involves helping people to identify those gifts and then, feed and cultivate those gifts.
Mm-hmm,
So you have to
exactly.
step out of your ego to do that. And that's what, is the whole approach to higher education, finds so difficult.
Mm-hmm.
There are alternatives out there. I can't paint abroad. They're all like that. But I'm just like the general
Right,
trend.
right. But in general,
Yeah, in
in
general,
general,
that's how things are
in
structured.
general, in
But there's
general.
so much potential to have a broader impact by taking a different approach.
I totally agree. And to my mind, I think we're on the same page as that's the key to actual reform is
Oh
to
yeah.
listen
Oh, listen. Yeah.
and pay attention to what other countries or well, yeah, other
Mhm.
countries are doing that is working
Yeah, that's working. Yeah,
because
absolutely.
what we're doing is not working so well
Hmm.
as a whole. I mean,
Yeah.
there are pockets, like you said. Well, like at Sing Sing with this program, or
Hmm.
like Mary Cohen used to have the choir at IMCC. That was very, very
Hmm.
successful and helpful to
Hmm.
people. Um, I mean, there are other schools that have offered education and go into the
Hmm.
prison. Cornell did that for a while. I don't know if they're still doing that or not, but they were doing that at Newton for a while, going actually into the prison, the professors and
I
teaching.
think there's what Yale is some Ivy League school had a debate team in the
Right,
prison that would beat the Yale students.
right.
So the prisoner debate team beat the Yale
Beat
student
the,
debate team.
yeah, exactly, exactly. So yes, I'm very much an advocate for positive reform,
Mhm.
just as you are.
And that's where, I think our society is, falling short because we're taking so much brilliance out of, out of the society because of the way that
Mhm.
we're not addressing the challenges that's kind of choking that brilliance off to the point
Right.
where, they get caught up into something that, winds them up in prison instead of where they should be. I was
Hmm.
shocked recently that Anamosa had master gardeners. So they're having was out to lunch with some people and they were talking about their gardening as the weather got nice and everything. And then,
Yeah.
the warden said, "Oh yeah, we have master gardeners.
Uh-huh.
So you're here." And I was like, "You just don't even
What?
think about something like that."
But it's true.
Yeah,
Yes.
but here instead of being out in the community creating beautiful landscapes or growing food or whatever
Hmm.
they have that it relates to gardening, instead of being able to share that with the society, they're locked behind the wall, and
Right.
so again, we're losing, so much.
I
And if
agree.
we really took, their education seriously, and again, I think a lot of the other places around the world that have been far more successful have a fundamentally different mindset about,
Yes.
who a prisoner is,
Yeah.
what they
Yes.
can become. We
There's
just,
somebody who needs some guidance. They're
yeah,
not
yeah,
somebody to
yeah.
throw away. They're
Hmm.
not. bad people.
Yeah.
And educationally, we need to teach people how to think, not what to think.
Oh yeah. Well, that's
But
yeah,
I know, but I believe I mean,
yeah,
of course,
yeah.
we need to teach reading,
Mhm,
writing, and math. I
mhm,
get that.
mhm.
I mean, people need to
Yeah,
know
yeah,
that just to function
absolutely.
in their
Yeah.
daily life.
Mhm.
But beyond that, we really need to teach people
Yeah,
the process of how to think
yeah. I
and
think
how to think through
it's even more
consequences.
important with respect to artificial intelligence
Oh my,
because
that's a
again,
whole nother
yeah, it's a
ballgame.
whole nother level. But that makes what you said that much more important because generating ideas isn't the challenge anymore.
No, it's not.
You can
Generating friends and social life isn't
yeah,
the
yeah,
challenge
yeah,
anymore.
that's
It
yeah,
isn't. That's
yeah.
frightening to
Hmm.
me. I mean,
Yeah, absolutely.
that's just my opinion. I'm
Oh
not,
yeah, you're
I
absolutely
just,
right. Because again, you get behind the
teenagers who
screen.
are making friends
Hmm.
uh, out of bots.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And the bots are programmed. I just listened to this on IPR today. The
Hmm.
bots are programmed to agree with you, and
Mm-hmm.
to make an
Yeah,
emotional
yeah, yeah.
connection and to
Wow.
be your friend.
Wow.
Well, some of the examples that were given about artificial intelligence and teenagers who are connected and have their best friend as a bot.
Mhm. Wow.
One was a young man, one of the testers
Hmm.
was asked said, my dad just doesn't get me. He just doesn't understand me. And the answer was, well, you just need to ignore him and do what you think is right because you know what's best for you.
That's what the bot said.
That's what the bot said.
Oh God. Yeah.
I mean, it's frightening.
Yeah.
And think about the mental health aspect. If somebody is into
Hmm.
self-harm and you're agreeing with them, or I mean,
I remember having a conversation with
oh
a
my,
administrator in the Cedar Rapids School District, and she was so alarmed at what's going on with the mental health issues that she said pretty soon that's just going to overtake everything, and we don't, get a
get
fundamentally
a hold of it.
different approach to how we're doing things. And
Right.
it's kind of scary just how little attention we're paying to mental health issues in the state of Iowa. We're one of
Right.
the lowest, places in the country as it relates to mental health, especially among
That's
young people.
That's right.
And so
That's right.
that's just,
And if you want help, getting in to see a psychiatrist takes
yeah,
months.
yeah, yeah. Mm.
I mean, yeah, we're lacking. Well,
Hmm.
Iowa, in my in my unbiased opinion, this is
Hmm.
a great state for business.
Hmm.
It's not such a great state for social issues.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
We score very high as far as business is concerned.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, People get left out a lot
Yeah,
in
yeah.
Iowa,
Well, things come full circle, and
a lot.
bring business here. People need, good schools to send their kids to, and if the schools are so overwhelmed by mental health issues, then that's
Right.
going to compromise the quality of the business. So, some level you have to really attend to these issues
I
because,
agree.
when
Well, a
you
lot of
get
the people who
good
get a good education here leave.
oh yeah, yeah,
They
yeah.
don't stay here.
Mm-hmm.
They leave.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that's
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's a whole other subject.
Yeah.
But anyway, sorry to get off track so much. But it's very interesting. It's very interesting to
Mm-hmm.
talk to someone who's an educator who like yourself, who is
Mm-hmm.
not only a person of faith, but also an educator and devoted to helping the inmates find
Oh
their
yeah,
place.
yeah.
So I really, really, really appreciate your time. I really
Oh
appreciate your
well,
time.
thank you. I enjoy
And
talking about these issues again. They weren't part of my job description. So, being retired now, it just gives me more opportunity to indulge these conversations. So they're enjoyable for me as well.
that's wonderful. So yes, I really appreciate it. And we'll be in touch pretty soon again, I'm
Oh,
sure.
that's right. That's right. I really want to, continue our conversation about how we can help our friend
Right,
accomplish his objectives,
right.
getting
That's
his ideas out there to have the positive impact that he's trying to have on society.
exactly. Exactly. So is there anything that you want to say before we close? that you want to be sure to say before we actually close?
I just really want to emphasize, if anyone in the audience, has a relationship with people in government, to encourage them to go and visit, some of these places and to
Yes.
talk with people because there's so much misinformation and stereotype that just doesn't begin to even scratch the surface of who these people are and what they can become. Um, and it's very sad to see people, who have so much potential and so much to offer just get reduced to the worst experiences of their lives, many of whom, at a time when they were still teenagers.
Right.
And so I
Agreed.
think people in decision making positions could have the experience of interacting and seeing for themselves firsthand versus just hearing the sound and the fury of you know whatever emotional reactions are out there. I think that it'd just be an eye-opening experience and lead to some compassion. And really it's not even so much compassion on behalf of the inmate, but just to see what our society
Mm-hmm.
missing out on, because you have these brilliant talented people in a position where they can't contribute in the way that they really have the potential to contribute. So that would
Right.
be a final statement. If you have anybody who is part of your life that's connected to decision makers, to help them to see firsthand versus just continuing to base policy and base responses off of stereotypes and misinformation.
Thank you very much. And thank you for that.
uh,
And thank you for the entire interview.
oh yeah, thank
I,
you.
I
Appreciate
really appreciate it. So we'll close now.
it.
And
Okay,
again, thank you.
all right, thank you.
Once, yeah. Once again, I'm Sue Hutchins, and this is Iowa Prison Perspectives. And I do really mean it when I say I want to hear from you. So please, please, please comment or contact me at iowaprisonperspectives@gmail.com. And that's iaprisonperspectives@gmail.com. And I look forward to seeing you again. And if you want to like or subscribe to this channel, please do. Thank you and have a good evening. Bye for now.